Thank you for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joanne Winter. I'm a director in the Program Policy Engagement and Governance Division at IRCC in the Settlement Integration and Francophone Affairs branch at IRCC. I've met many of you virtually during our consultation in May earlier this year, but it's great to see you in person and to engage face-to-face in such a large room. I'm looking forward to our session this afternoon. I know that our meeting is later in the afternoon and you've been sitting for most of the day, so I encourage you just to feel free to get up and move around. Even for those of our colleagues who are joining us virtually, please get up and move around a bit. Just want to give a bit of a wave to Margot Sokol from my team who's supporting me here today. Many of you have met her already.
First of all, I'd like to welcome you for this session and discussion this afternoon. This is perhaps the first time that IRCC brings together local partners in immigration from the RIFs and the Francophone community partners for a targeted discussion about communities. You will see different opportunities to share your observations in your communities, and you also have the opportunity to share your experiences in mobilizing partners within your communities. As the networks spread across the country, there's a growing desire to engage IRCC in a deeper conversation about communities.
Of the National LIP Secretariat in 2020, IRCC has developed a relationship with the local immigration partnership, the zonal immigration partnership, that didn't really exist before. Regular monthly check-ins with your co-chairs, for those of you who are in the LIPS network, Doug and Paulina. And Doug and Paulina, I haven't even seen you today, so put up your hand. Nice to see you. I have regular check-ins with Doug and Paulina. And as the director within IRCC responsible for the policy side of LIPS, and my SN colleagues, we have a really good understanding in those meetings with Doug and Paulina. Some of the experiences that you as LIPS and ZIPs have at the local level, that's different from direct service providers. As you may recall, in May of this year, we hosted a virtual CFP consultation with the LIP and the ZIP network to seek your perspectives and experiences on what is currently working well in community engagement and where there are opportunities for improvement. Aujourd'hui, je suis si heureuse que nous puissions.
I'm delighted that we're gathered today for the first in-person meeting. We are also accompanied by our Francophone colleagues to share their experience. This is therefore a very important session. We want to continue to foster collaboration and engagement with you and among each other.
This is the first time we've done this in a forum like this. So your feedback, your insights, and suggestions will be really important and really valuable for us as we navigate today's event in hopes we can do it again in the future. Our meeting today comes on the heels of the launch of the National Call for Proposals for the settlement and resettlement programs. And I hope you all had a chance to look at the new funding guidelines. I'd encourage you to attend one of the number of information webinars that the department will be hosting and ask questions through the Q&A function. And while I appreciate that the CFP is likely top of mind for you right now, our aim today is really to engage in a forward-thinking dialogue, addressing fundamental aspects that will shape our current and future initiatives, collaboration, and overall trajectory at the local level. Nous sommes impatients d'entendre
We are impatient to hear your point of views, your ideas, and your aspirations. Your experience on the ground are crucial to better understand the needs and the challenges that newcomers face in different communities. We also would like to celebrate the success and achievements of our local immigration partners, especially in Francophone immigration and the welcoming Francophone communities. A large number of your organizations have implemented remarkable initiatives that have had a deep impact on the lives of newcomers. It's important to share these experiences to mutually support each other in our community efforts.
Today's meeting is just another step in strengthening our learning from each other. Your insights are instrumental in achieving our common goal, the creation of welcoming communities where newcomers thrive and contribute to the rich tapestry of Canada. So I'm going to walk us through our agenda. Now we're into the real meat of it. And we'll begin with a great panel discussion with 6 representatives from LIPS, ZIPS, RIFs, and our welcoming Francophone communities. After the first hour, we will then break off into smaller groups to delve deeper into the issues with some discussions. So without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists today, and I want to thank you in advance, panelists, for your participation. First, I'll introduce Méditerranée Olivier Guédé, coordinator
in the support to the RIF, the Federation of Welcoming Francophone Communities, and Acadian Communities, Inuk Touzin, coordinator in supporting welcoming Francophone communities, the Federation of Francophone Communities, Michel
Suchu, thank you. Vice President of Strategic Partnerships from the Windsor Essex Local Immigration Partnership, Steve Reynolds, we're just kind of popping back and forth on the panel, Executive Director from the Pembina Valley Local Immigration Partnership, and Dauphin and Area Welcoming Communities Coalition. Ariane Savy, Project Manager, Office of Diversity and Inclusion from the Halifax Immigration Partnership, and Florentine Barrage, Manager of Immigrant Integration Research and Planning from the Greater Victoria Local Immigration Partnership. So we met as a group a couple weeks ago to talk about our plan for today. So we have just under an hour for our discussion. We're hoping that this discussion will give you fodder for the breakout discussions that follow. I'll read the question. I'll give the order in which the panelists will speak to their experiences and how they respond to those questions, and then we'll move on from there. And as the panelists know, I'm giving them about 4 minutes, or as a new kid suggested, 3 minutes, 52 seconds to respond. So we'll get started. In your experience, so the first question, in your experience, can you elaborate on the long-standing challenges that have traditionally impacted community resilience and receptiveness to newcomers? What new or emerging pressures do you believe are exacerbating these long-standing challenges in the context of historically unprecedented immigration levels? Selon votre expérience, pourriez-vous partager des défis de long terme qui ont
The same question is repeated in French.
ainsi que la capacité de réception de nouveaux arrivants? Selon vous, quelles pressions nouvelles ou émergentes ont pour l'effet d'augmenter ces défis dans le contexte des niveaux d'immigration sans précédent? Donc, on va commencer avec Méditerranée.
Let's begin with Méditerranée, Anu, and then Ariane and Steve. Thank you very much. My name is Méditerranée Olivier. To answer your question, I can see these challenges under 2 angles. First of all, we have them external and internal challenges. For external challenges, for Francophone immigration and the target that is challenging. We have a target of 4.4% that was defined in 2003, was achieved 20 years later. This is a serious concern for us at the CFA. The new target has been defined and sets the percentage of Francophone immigrants between 6 and 8% for the next 3 years. This is a serious concern for the CFA, and we will have to reflect on this target and to find some of the solutions to this challenge. Now, for internal challenges and the risks, we are also faced with the collaboration challenge. This is something that we've discussed today, the collaboration between RIFs and LIPs. There are some initiatives in our different communities that enable us to enhance the collaboration and to keep progressing. We've learned a lot about the openness of LIPS to make sure that this collaboration is fruitful and has a positive impact in different communities. Also, for challenges that RIFs are faced with, there's the whole challenge of funding. Many RIFs are faced with a lack of funding or a lack of resources. We spoke about wages and mental health issues. These are some of the challenges that RIFs are faced with, and we will need to address these challenges for the upcoming years. So that's how I can answer the first question.
Pour ma part,
Minister One has raised some of my answers, so I won't repeat them. However, I wanted to insist on the impacts of low wages and staff turnover. This has been a common theme throughout the conference. This is often the result of a lack of funding. We also spoke about another challenge, which is the referral challenge for Francophone settlement services that are referred to Francophone settlement services. I think sometimes there's a lack of understanding of the specificity of the services. The French-speaking community is not a homogeneous group from coast to coast to coast. Often we see the French community as only limited to Quebec, and we're a victim of this perception, especially because our percentage of the population continues to drop because of the assimilation in the past of 150 years of the Francophone communities outside Quebec. So there are different struggles of the French community to ensure its sustainability. And this existence is threatened by some small challenges or challenges that minimizes the French-speaking communities across Canada. There's also an inconsistency on international messages of Canada claiming that Canada is a bilingual country, but the reality, if you're in Prince George, Calgary, or Sudbury, clearly it's important to learn English as fast as possible to be functional in society. And naturally, this is something that Francophone communities try to overcome when they welcome Francophone newcomers. And they also have to have increased their understanding of the Francophone community. Speaking to someone who comes from colonial Africa or French-speaking countries in Africa that were oppressed by this language and trying to say our mea culpa together to save our own challenges is somewhat daunting. We do not have the right tools to overcome this, but we have a conversation, and there's a potential to succeed only if we have support of English speakers to validate the legitimacy of our cultural process. We have a large volume of small communities in remote regions that have very low levels of newcomers. It's difficult to establish a network of institutions to provide settlement services in French in that context. Thank you for keeping the time. In closing, we also have some institutional gaps. we want to fill these gaps in the Francophone settlement process, and we have to use English services here and there. And because of this, we have some leaks left and right, where we lose some Francophone newcomers that leave the Francophone network and never come back. For some of the emerging challenges, for the second part of your question, I want to say that everybody wants a welcoming Francophone community. This is something mentioned by the Senate. There's a new French-speaking settlement policy, but the resources are lacking, and we have to meet the needs of housing and transportation to be able to materialize this type of initiative.
So for us at the Halifax LIP, sense of belonging is one of the standing challenges that we see in our community. Now, with the rise of newcomers arriving in Halifax, including a large number of refugee and asylum seekers, we are seeing conflicts with newcomer youth and members of established communities. We also see the need of mental health resources, and some of the concerns are feeling isolated because of long waiting lists to access English classes, and without it they can't get a job with a stable income. More and more, we are seeing youth newcomers playing a role of family interpreters because interpretation services are scarce, particularly with minority languages, and families do not want to use members of their own community to preserve their privacy. With that, kids are missing the opportunity of being kids. They must be part of conversations to act as translations to the family. These conversations can be about medical appointments, exams, even parent-teacher meetings. These kids do not have a choice and opportunity to discuss how they feel about it. That can transform into trauma, and that can be manifested into issues at school with bullying and fights or feeling vulnerable. We are also learning that families feel uncomfortable asking for support to deal with these issues.
I'll speak on behalf of the Dauphin and Area Welcoming Communities Coalition. Dauphin is a community of about 8,000 people, 300 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg. And the emerging pressures that we're seeing in our work there is very similar to some national ones: growing job vacancies in the local economy, need for affordable housing, need for public transportation. Communities of that size, like Dauphin, don't have any public transportation, childcare, and advanced education. One of the interesting dynamics in Dauphin is that the community's total population has been status quo for over 30 years, but the demographics of the population have been changing significantly. So in the 20-year period from Census 2001 to Census 2021, for example, the local immigrant population nearly doubled from 4% to 7% and is really increasing in recent years. And the Indigenous population in the city of Dauphin increased from 11% to 27%. Many local decision makers and senior leaders are still locally born, white, non-Indigenous, non-immigrant people who are not very well connected to the changing demographics and the changes in the community that they lead and are responsible for in many ways. So the Immigration Partnership has been well positioned, and it's been kind of a key part of our work to even tell the story of the community to many of the people who live in it who don't realize how much it's changing, even as they live there together in a small community. So that's manifested positively in a couple ways. There's a good collective current initiative and push to get the municipality to really carefully look at public transportation. And that's really a collective effort with Manitoba Métis Federation and a Treaty 2 office and the local immigration partnership and other local community services and nonprofits. So some of that telling the story covers needs that are shared in common between local Indigenous community as well as newcomers. And so that's been a good connecting point to advocate from.
Thanks very much. Méditowan, vous avez commencé.
Méditowan, you started the conversation this afternoon. I would like to know if you have some personal reflections. I haven't heard these before. Would you like to add anything? I also want to speak about integration and retention. This is the purpose of our welcoming Francophone communities. We want to increase the integration and retention of Francophone newcomers. We have a challenge of acknowledging some prior credentials. We also have challenges with housing. We've also heard about discrimination and also comments from local people that fear that newcomers are stealing jobs and housing. So we have to debunk these myths and to change the mindsets. And we also have the challenge of essential services, especially for education. For newcomers, the right area to have education services in the preferred language is an important retention element that we need to work on to make sure that newcomers really feel that their needs are fulfilled and have access to all the services in the different communities. So that's what I wanted to add in terms of the challenges that we're faced with.
Our second question. La deuxième question, dans le contexte des niveaux.
With the context of unprecedented immigration levels, the whole question of friendly and welcoming communities has become more important than ever. Can you speak about some of the measures taken by your organizations to shift from friendly communities to welcoming communities? What can you say about your community integration capacity, and how can we strengthen the welcoming foundations with physical, social, and organizational elements, as well as community resources that are present in communities? Would you have innovative practices and best practices to share?
In the context of unprecedented immigration levels, the distinction between a friendly community and a welcoming one has become more critical than ever. Can you speak to the measures in your organizations and your communities have taken to transition communities from being friendly to genuinely welcoming? What role does absorptive capacity play in this context, and how can the existing physical, social, and organizational elements and resources within a community or welcoming infrastructure be leveraged and enhanced in communities? Are there any innovative solutions or practices you'd like to highlight? So we'll start with Florentine, then we'll go to Steve, Ariane, and after Inuk.
Thank you for that question. I think that question was particularly well put because the Greater Victoria Local Immigration Partnership in 2020 did a racism survey, and what we got from that was people saying that our community was very friendly but not very welcoming, using exactly those words and talking about it being a community of white masks of politeness that doesn't go any deeper in creating connections and relationships between communities. When looking at the absorptive capacities of our of the Greater Victoria area, we all know that it's not easy. We have talked a lot about it at these past couple of days, with housing being a real difficult issue, a really challenging issue across BC. But I also want to be really honest here that I'm really trying to resist the rhetoric around this, that we're either going to do something for the newcomers or do something for the unhoused or do something for the Indigenous population, because I really feel sometimes that those types of worries get us gets vulnerable groups pitched against each other. And I think we need to be very clear that when we are trying to explain the challenges that one particular vulnerable group experiences, that also very often pays up for these other, we are really in it together as different vulnerable groups. What kind of, thank you, what kind of measures are we taking? We are making sure that people with lived experience are at the center of the work we're doing through an immigrant advisory team. We have an equity table. We have a anti-racism media campaign, but that is not enough. We also have anti-racist principles throughout all our priority areas at the GVLIP. But again, that is not enough. I think it's also really important that we're not just inviting people at our tables, we're also showing up at other tables in the community so that we can reach these organizations and institutions that are not yet involved in our work. One example of that is a work that we recently did in the health sector. It really took 2 years of knocking and showing up and asking again and again to get our health authority at our table. But since they have been at our table, we have really made huge strides. One thing we discovered, for example, was in terms of welcoming and kind of anti-racist work in healthcare, is that very often the health authority itself is so big, right? They didn't even know each other across departments. And so we have a really wonderful interpretation department in our health sector, creating really great tools that help with interpretations and on iPads and tablets and things like that. But they're not hearing from their other department that those tools are underused, for example. So we could really be the connector between these different departments in the health authority. We organized an event for the wider health authority based on case studies and had people just look at case studies based on what we've heard from clients and from settlement workers, what people are experiencing in hospitals, for example, so that they are informed about the challenges that newcomers have that resulted in a report. But what I was very excited about, we also were approached then by a student who was so interested and said they had never heard about anything like this in terms of their education, that she, this past week, has run a pilot at Camosun College using the tools that we had created, these case studies, to test them out on first-year nursing students so they would get that information right from the start in their education. And so I think a lot of these types of measures that we're taking always happen at all these different levels, right? We're having tools, we're having discussions, we're also talking about how these things can be changed in educational trajectories for relevant folks such as nurses right from the beginning. So thanks for that.
It is a highly relevant question, and we hear about it a lot through the local immigration partnership and through settlement services. A quote from a member of the Immigrant Advisory Table in Dauphin, one thing that was said was that people are very friendly here, but they're friendly for 10 minutes. And I think that kind of sums up some of the Canadian culture around friendliness that's, brief and a bit shallow, and something that we hear, or can be, I should say. Something that we hear pretty often from newcomers is that, this community was really friendly and really welcoming when I arrived. I can't believe people are so nice and they're helpful, and it was great. But 6 months later, 12 months later, 18 months later, I'm very lonely. I'm very isolated. I don't have deep relationships or meaningful relationships, even though people have been very nice to me. And so I think I've heard many excellent activity and project and program ideas here at the conference that connect people and connect community members and build bridges and connections, and really just want to emphasize the value of those as an opportunity for people to develop relationships and to really belong and develop meaningful relationships. That's a critical part of settlement and belonging, and it's not just like a nice to have part, those activities. In our case, also being welcoming has meant building settlement capacity. And so Regional Connections Immigrant Services, for example, it's the end result of the amalgamation of 4 different contribution agreements and different contribution agreement holders, and the services in these individual communities. We have offices in 4 communities now. were smaller and scattered, and kind of some of the typical problems of duplication and losing people in referrals and limited capacity. Those changes to address challenges like that take time. Our first step was to co-locate into a building together. So there are still separate programs, but at least in the same place that could refer people across the hall instead of across town, again, in towns that don't have public transportation. And there, the administrative redundancy of multiple client intakes and some of the program work and admin work was really apparent. And it was just in 2016 that we incorporated as a nonprofit and moved all those programs out of the chambers of commerce and community development corporations and places they had been into a dedicated newcomer serving nonprofit organization that has allowed us to significantly increase the settlement capacity over time. So for example, in Dauphin, the settlement services had been for 7 years under Community Futures Office with one settlement worker. And for the last CFP, April 1st, 2020, they came on board with regional connections. We worked together with the Community Futures office, and there's a lot of in-kind interest on both of our parts. And the Dauphin office has 6 staff now in a LINK ESL program, Settlement Workers in Schools program, Home Instruction for Parents of Preschool Youngsters program, and a local immigration partnership. All supported by program managers and staff in an organization that can provide that support and deliver those programs in a smaller community that might not have them otherwise. So that's been positive progress as well.
For me, as an immigrant myself, a welcoming community truly cares about one another, and being friendly is just a task. Our LIP is working on creating opportunities to intercultural connections through one of our working groups, and we are working on exposing newcomers at the beginning at their journey of living in Halifax to Mi'kmaq culture. We are creating spaces in collaboration with the Mi'kmaq knowledge keepers to share their protocols during gatherings and learn about traditional foods, and bringing people to reserves so they can have contact with nature, and also to see how what grows in the area, and the hope to teach newcomers what food can be planted so they can start thinking about food security. We're also going to introduce a blanket exercise to newcomers so they can expose to a bit of the history told by the Mi'kmaq lens. From the Mi'kmaq lens. And we're also discussing a creation of online sessions with series of education pieces so the population that lives in the rural Halifax can feel included if they cannot come to in-person events, because transit, again, is also an issue. We hope these connections will allow for newcomers to have opportunity to meet and identify with characteristics from the community and feel a better sense of belonging. Thank you.
Juste mentionner que la plupart des
Just like to mention that most of the good practices, it's not the CFA, but it's the French welcoming communities, Francophone communities, so that I learn from these matters, and I can testify to what the others are carrying out. To become welcoming is something that needs to be learned, but it's based on the conceptual ideas and things, so that we have a similar issue with French about people very heterogeneous that are slowly learning to deal with the diversity which is incoming. The goodwill is very good, but it can be very passive as an approach. And this leads to this notion of friendly versus welcoming. To become welcoming, we have to do concrete things. We have to do things like foster families, community gardens. For example, they're doing that in Hawkesbury, the training workshops. Almost all the welcoming Francophone communities do that. Winter in Canada, employability, entrepreneurship. popular universities where we use the knowledge of the new arrivals for those that are already there. Welcome days that are very popular, but to go beyond networking and create we have to use affinities, volunteer work, committees, boards of directors, of course, have to participate in political action, the work, arts, cultural activities. These are all good means to meet people that have similar interests to ours and to create real links, and so to be able to move closer to friendship. So and other good practices. Hamilton had a project called Elan F, which is about employability and entrepreneurship, where we've trained new Francophone arrivals to the business atmosphere in Canada. There's networking for people that are already involved in business and in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. There was the Territorial Forum, which is an economical activity which brings people, job seekers and employers, so that they would learn each other's realities and see what the employers can do to make workers be better served and better integrated. So using for housing and all these other measures. In Sudbury, there's an activity. Talent go this way, but I see the talent where young people with an activity of type of who's got talent for young immigrants, and the whole community would grab the group around this, and it was something in the French welcoming communities, and the new Ontario Theatre in Sudbury. So these partnerships to increase community impact. And Calgary, there's a youth house and the Marche Gourmand and Nunavut to be able to learn about foods from nature, collaborations on housing strategies in Edmundston with the French, welcoming French community and others. Thank you very much.
As you heard what some of your colleagues shared, just giving you an opportunity, because you didn't hear their remarks before, but just wanted to give an opportunity if there's anything else that you wanted to add or reflect on after hearing them.
Thanks for that. One thing, actually, whenever I hear anybody talk, and after all the days that I've been here, I arrived on Sunday, as some of you also did, and I know we're all getting really tired. But at the same time, I always, when I hear all the innovative practices that everybody's doing and the work that everybody's doing, I just get filled with some hope. I know we first had the question of challenges, and that gets us a bit down, but then I think, okay, we're all working on our own ways, in our own kind of local relevant ways to make this, make our communities welcoming. So yeah, I'm very grateful for my colleagues here at the table.
Great, thanks. And for the final question, strategic plans form the cornerstone of your LIP, ZIP, and RIF activities. Can you speak more about your individual strategic plans? How do they contribute to or align with broader community-level plans? What methods and indicators are currently being used to measure progress and demonstrate the impact and effectiveness of your strategic plans in guiding the actions and initiatives of your LIPs, ZIPs, and RIFs? And how can LIPs, ZIPs, and RIFs, and welcoming Francophone communities as well, enhance their strategic plans to make them more robust and strategic in terms of reporting, while also recognizing local variations? Les plans stratégiques sont la pierre angulaire des activités des LIPs, ZIPs et RIFs. Pourriez-vous parler davantage de vos plans stratégiques individuels? Comment ces plans-là contribuent ou sont alignés avec les plans communautaires plus larges? Quelles sont les méthodes, des indicateurs de succès, ainsi que des approches utilisées pour démontrer l'impact et l'efficacité de vos plans stratégiques pour guider vos actions et initiatives? Comment les LIPs, ZIPs et RIFs peuvent renforcer, et les communautés accueillantes francophones, renforcer le plan stratégique et les rendre plus robustes en termes de reddition de comptes tout en reconnaissant les variations locales? So we'll start Michelle, Steve, Florentine, and we'll end with Midi Tomo.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to do my best. I'm a stand-up talker, so bear with me as I sit at a table and share some strategies with all of you. I represent the Windsor-Essex Local Immigration Partnership, so we consist of over 90 different organizations across our region, and those are individuals included who may be newcomers to our community, but also longstanding contributors to that community. We've been calling our strategic plan our action plan since I began with the LIP over 14 years ago, and it's a reflection of our community priorities and activities to support the direction not only of our community, but federal policy, how that shifts and what the federal government is prioritizing. Our leadership model is to lead by example and treat others the way you want and deserve others to work with you. We participate, echoing some comments earlier, participate at other tables in the community. This is key to understanding the priorities of the broader community and forming relationships that in turn support the action plan of our LIP. One example is our region is fortunate to have 2 SDI projects in it. One in particular that is a strong example of understanding local priorities. This SDI is led by the YMCA of Southwestern Ontario and is called the We Value Partnership. This work has developed into an opportunity to assess the skills, abilities, and assets newcomers calling our region home have to contribute to the region's economic and social fabric. This project also provides our LIP with much needed data that demonstrates referrals amongst local service providers and the broader community. This real-time data is shared with our LIP Council members in form of data events, and Matthew Dunlop is here today from the YMCA of Southwestern Ontario over there. He'll give you a big wave if anybody wants to learn more about the We Value Partnership. Measurement in community development work is a challenge, but it's not impossible. The old model was the number of meetings and attendees that participated in your meeting. That no longer stands. Now we look at the priority the work supports, the steps or actions associated with the project or the initiative, and lastly, but most importantly, the impact, that these outcomes are captured in the form of telling the story often, through project updates in a narrative format, surveys, and monthly success stories, and of course, using social media to tell those stories and raise awareness. But the best recognition and the best outcome of that work is really around partner recognition. When someone from the outside of the settlement sector starts to tell the story of the impact of the work that you've done collectively as a LIP and working with a RIF, that's the value and really why I've stayed in the sector as long as I have. Enhancing our strategic plans. Earlier, I mentioned supporting the direction of federal priorities. The Francophone immigration pathway is a strong example of that. However, for the last 12 years, our LIP has been working in collaboration with our RIF. This isn't something new, but many people in this room have probably heard me already talk about this, but I will say that relationship has evolved by building trust and mutual respect for each other and the contributions of each group or partner to the collective effort. It's not about whose logo goes on the flyer first. It's about the outcome and the impact that work has collectively can make to support the transition that newcomers are going through into your community. Our LIPs created a designated seat on our executive committee for a member of the RIF. It's a committed seat. It's part of our terms of reference, and our terms of reference is produced in French and in English. You'll note that I'm an English speaker, and why is it that I support the French language and the Francophone partners? It only makes sense, and it only always has. We are a bilingual country, and we need to continue to reinforce that value. We also recently developed an English, Spanish, and French online map that supports newcomers locate community supports, and we could not have done that work without our partners. We co-hosted World Refugee Day with our RIF and our CLIF. The CLIF is the local committee of our RIF. And 2 weeks ago, I could not join the planning meeting for this session because we were hosting our annual forum. And we were doing that in recognition of National Francophone Immigration Week, where we worked with our RIF and CLIF to host our annual event. All presentations were delivered in French first and English second. And we are a LIP. Remember that. So, yes, I'm very proud of that, and we couldn't, again, have done it without our partners. We provided simultaneous interpretation to make sure that everyone in the room was able to understand in French or English. This method is about true collaboration. It's not just partnership in name, and it's the result of respectful interactions with each other. And that's what all of you can do to bring to the tables in your communities, to work with your RIFs, work with your ZIPs, and work with each other's LIPs. In Southwestern Ontario, we have a network of LIPs, and we hope that that work will continue on. Thank you.
I'll share a bit about the strategic planning for the Pembina Valley Local Immigration Partnership. If Elaine came up, she could talk about it for an hour, except that curling season started and she lost her voice. So she's drinking tea and she's back there. Many of you know Elaine. The Pembina Valley Local Immigration Partnership started in 2017, and our first strategic plan was in 2018. So we've just been at the end of that 5-year plan cycle and working on a new strategic plan all through this year. One of the biggest lessons learned we felt as far as a process and mechanism for strategic planning was that looking back on and reflecting on how we carried it out in 2018, it very much hinged on a one-day facilitated strategic planning session with 40-some stakeholders and community members, but very much turned into one of those, the loudest voices in the room had a significant influence on the strategic plan. That may or may not have been reflective of newcomers in the community and the needs we were dealing with. So that was something that we wanted to adjust for in terms of process this time, and it's been a much longer and more involved process. It also has the advantage of having 5+ years of LIP work to build on. So it started by pulling in all of the research and reports and forums and meeting minutes and working group activities from the previous 5 years as valuable input for what had been worked on, what had been accomplished, what the outcomes had been, and what the needs still were, and what needs had been emerging. A lot of that was in there, and all of those activities had engaged a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of newcomers in the community. So that all of that was pulled in, and we had really several months of a series of meetings and committees within the regular workflow of the LIP that focused on strategic planning, as well as special meetings and committees and engagement from newcomers and stakeholders, and really wanted to cast a broad net and have equitable input and not just have it be influenced by people who speak up and speak up well and advocate well at a facilitated session, but really address and include all of the needs and voices that we could. And so I think that was really worthwhile. Elaine and her team put a lot of work. It was a much more involved and longer term process. We're just near the end of, but we're much more happy with that than with the process that we used in 2018. And one other side note as far as strategic planning, I think it's really valuable in application and implementation outside of the LIP as well. On the settlement service side, it's very valuable for us to identify areas of service and activity that need to be developed to help meet needs that have been identified through the local immigration partnership. It's also a great asset for funding proposals for diverse funding and grants and different activities. And we use the LIP strategic plan all the time for that, for direct services as well.
One thing in the Greater Victoria Local Immigration Partnership that we were very fortunate with was that when our strategic plan came into action, which was 2020, 2025, that's where we're working with right now, we were also approached by the City of Victoria to sit on their Welcoming Cities Task Force. So it was really just happened to be, and the city is not our contract holder. I know for some folks that's the case. So it was just really fortuitous that as we're starting to working through our strategic plan, we were also able to share those strategies with the city, and we have seen that the City of Victoria in the past years has created a citywide strategy with 22 recommendations that all have been adopted, and a very clear action plan and a roadmap that's called Dream in Color, that we have really been able to actively participate in and contribute to. A challenge there for our particular region is that we have 13 municipalities around us. So my question is always, okay, so we did this wonderful work with the City of Victoria, and now can we expand that beyond the boundaries, right, of the municipalities itself? I also wanted to say a little bit about the measurement, the impact measurement. So it's definitely in terms of learnings for our next strategic plan, as we're actually getting into a new planning process over the next year, so that by 2025 we have a new plan in place, hopefully, to really build in that impact measurement right from the start in a way that we had not done in the last plan as well. It's hard sometimes because a lot of the work that we're doing is slow and is that kind of consistency of showing up and being there. And sometimes that slow work and that relationship building and that trust building is hard to measure or hard to put numbers on. And sometimes also to really think about what are we really measuring? If we're keeping too much, if we're hoping to just see that needle go up and things go better and better and better, that's not sometimes how your impact shows up. Sometimes your impact shows up by actually things showing up maybe a little worse. And what I mean with that is when we did our racism survey, we heard from many folks that they experienced racism in the workplace, but they were not talking about it. Right? So because they did not trust that their employers would do something about this, that it was useful for them to talk about it, and they were very afraid to rock the boat, to risk their job security by making, right? They said, we're just keeping our heads down and we just keep working because we need this job. As we're creating more welcoming communities, as we're working with employers, hopefully those discussions can start happening. And people who are experiencing racism at work trust their employers better to make changes. And so that will mean that if you're starting to measure impact, you will start seeing more stories about racism. That does not necessarily mean there is more racism there, but that people are talking about it, right? So think about that when we're thinking about what are we measuring. We're not necessarily measuring a kind of neat step, things getting better. It will get there, hopefully. But it might show up more rocky. But if there's no talking about racism in your community and suddenly there is, that is something that's really good. So that's a good impact of the work that you're doing. So I just want to leave that with you to think about that.
Merci beaucoup pour ce qui nous concerne.
Thank you. And for what in the level of our relief, we have made some advances at the level of strategic planification. The relief now in 2022 has a logical plan that covers all of the process of planification, and this new logic model replaces the 2013 logic model, which is put together for 5 years, and the intermediate results are measured and see whether the intermediate these are useful. So this document comes along with a measurement framework which allows us to keep in the reports on all of the elements of the logic model, and so that will allow us to see a bit how the expected changes in the application of the logic model actually happens on the ground. And so part of this logic model includes strategic planification, that is based on the logic model and is in the basis of strategic plan so that the action plan can be carried out and applied. And we have a report on the outcomes which is sent to the IRCC. And we are quite happy to see that based on our new logic model as a part of the document that has been recommended, the 224 ADP for the reefs. There's also the arrival of planification as a challenge, as a national Francophone immigration policy, which is coming together with C13, and other things have been very forward in the reefs, and so this allows planification based on these different documents, and this allows planification within the reef. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wondering if you had any reflections as you heard what your colleagues had to say.
I heard the first.
I only had the first half of what you had because I had these on.
What your other colleagues had to say in terms of their response to the question. You started us off and kind of kicked it off in a really great way. Just wondering if you had any reflections after hearing what they had to say. A couple minutes or so.
Having been part of the local immigration model really from the beginning, it's really heartwarming is the wrong phrase, but I'm going to use it. Heartwarming to hear my colleagues sitting here, whether they're representing RIFs, whether they're representing LIPs, or other community partners on a national or local level, that we're all sort of walking together down this. At the very beginning of LIPs and RIFs, it was sort of, well, it was legitimately RIFs were on one side of the room and LIPs were on the other side of the room. All of you, some of you that have been here many, many years can remember those days. And this agenda really reflects those changes, and it's exciting to see what can unfold out of the next CFP. I know we're not supposed to talk about it, but it's the reality. Everybody's talking about it. But you know, we're grounded now. We're in a good place, ready to action the next opportunities. So, really happy to be a part of this today. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Thanks to all the panelists. Just merci beaucoup. Thank you for your thoughts, your contributions. Certainly. A lot that we've put on the table, both in terms of what you've heard from your colleagues up here, but also just your thoughts and contributions as well. And Michelle, I had to laugh when you said we're not allowed to talk about the CFP. We can talk about the CFP all we want. I just don't know that I'll be able to answer any of your questions. Not for now. So we're going to move now into our breakout session. So the main focus of this session is to discuss our approaches and share best practices for developing comprehensive, impactful, and measurable long-term plans for building welcoming communities. If you've had a chance to glance or maybe read through in detail the call for proposals which launched, you'll notice a rebranding of strategic plans to community plans. And this might seem like a minor shift in terminology, but within IRCC, what we've heard from you over the years, whether it's been in fora like this, or whether it's been on a one-on-one basis, or whether it's been with regional directors or your program officers, we felt that the shift to community plans actually signified a more inclusive and participatory framework that empowers various community members, organizations, and partners to contribute meaningfully and fostering a sense of shared responsibility and collective action towards achieving those common objectives. For us at IRCC, this change reflects a deliberate move to emphasize the collaborative nature of these plans. And I know that the dedicated work that each of you have been putting into the development and implementation of your plans are super important. And your strategic plans, your community plans are not just documents, but that they're living roadmaps that align with the needs and aspirations of your community members, newcomers, and stakeholders. And we recognize the collaborative nature of your planning with all of those partners. So we hope that what you've heard in this panel today in the first hour will lead you into this kind of next space of where we're going now. So I'm just going to share a few logistics going forward. So first off, I'm going to introduce Aurélie Lacassin. Aurélie, oh, there you are. Okay, so Aurélie is one of our facilitators. She's going to make the rounds throughout the room, kind of listening in on your conversations, may poke a table or two, asking you if you'll be willing to report out. At the end, of course, we can't do a massive report out, so we'll do a report out from 3 tables within the room of approximately 2 minutes, and then we've got our friends participating virtually, and we'll hear from Carl Dolandes, who's the facilitator, one of the facilitators, along with Alina Sutter, who is also a facilitator in the virtual space. So Carl will come in and share with us some of the reflections in the virtual space. So for those of you in the room, you'll be working through 2 questions. For our virtual participants, Alina and Carl will work with you to identify the 2 of 4 questions that we've proposed. We have approximately 35 minutes for our breakout sessions. As I mentioned, Aurélie will circulate here within the room along with me and Margot, who I introduced to you earlier. So I would just ask that in your tables you identify a note taker who'll capture the themes, the nature of your discussion. We're going to collect your notes after to do a roll-up and do a report out to all of you so that you can see what some of the discussions were at the table. So when we reconvene in 35 minutes from when I stop talking, Eastern time, we'll get 3 tables within the room to do a couple minutes of report out. And then we'll end there with Vicki Esses. Will close us out today. So thank you for your time in this first hour. Looking forward to what we hear in our conversations in the next 35 minutes or so.
Oka. Très bien.
Alors, on va, je pense...
So I think we're going to start with Douglas.
Group A, so with the first 2 questions, and I see our report person in charge to report from the online session. Go on, Carl.
Okay, thank you so much. So first, thanks all to my group for that very interesting conversation. It's obviously a dense and complex question. So we're talking about strategic plans and some of the things that some of the best practices, the effective ideas within strategic plans that allow us to adapt to, among other things, increasing immigration levels and changes over time. So the first thing that we talked about was flexibility and the importance of developing strategic plans that can adapt to emergent issues and changing conditions. And in that, we talked about the need to build core principles, core ideas, and themes that within those themes, there's the possibility of changing again, to adapting to changing conditions. We also talked about the importance of staying responsive to community needs, and of course, that's a major part of what we do in building partnerships and being responsive to what we hear from our partners in our regular conversations. We also talked about the importance of education and using community-based research to develop a body of knowledge about community challenges that can then be shared with community partners to help educate our partners and bring them on board. And building the skill sets and knowledge of newcomer partners and other partners to enable them to take leading roles in the work. We talked about the idea that we need to build partnerships, but we can't necessarily assume that all of the partners we want to work with are ready to work with us, and we need to be there to support them and build up their skill sets and knowledge so that they can fulfill their potential as partners. I mean, to establish common language and a knowledge base and common goals among partners. We need to work closely with ethnocultural communities and empower them to take a more active role and to better meet the needs of their communities. And we, as LIPS, as we've talked about as LIPS, need to have a role in educating IRCC program officers about the work we do and the need for resources to support relationship building. We talked as well about engagement. We talked about being ready to listen to what is happening on the ground, listening to the community, and also recognizing that that there is a lot of work that comes alongside that. And if we have community partners continually coming to us with their needs, that can tap our capacity. So we need to strike a balance of being ready to listen, to be engaged with community, but recognizing our own limitations, our own capacities. We talked also about partnerships and how strategic plans need to leverage partnerships with RIFs, and that's obviously a major theme we're talking about today and something we need to continue the conversation on. We need to support partners who do not receive funding, whether those are spiritual communities or other partners that are not funded by IRCC or their agencies and might lack capacity to engage effectively with LIPs and RIFs. We need to be able to provide honorariums. This is very important. We need to be able to support participation, and the scope of that participation and eligibility for honorariums need to expand beyond focus groups. Again, we talked more about empowering and educating partners to give input into strategic planning and to understand their role in driving the work. Too often we get in conversations with partners where partners see themselves, or LIPs sometimes see partners as consultants informing them on the work that they should be doing rather than collaborators in the work. Yeah. Yeah, I can stop there. That's good.
That's great. Thank you very much, Douglas. That's quick something. Thank you. Lots of nice idea. Inuk, I think you were working on the question 3 and 4 from the group B, right?
Je suis pas certain.
Bon, vas-y.
Mais on a répondu.
I'm not sure. Well, we answered the question on the strategic plan, and we were saying the strategic plans have to start from a vision, and that they are currently not harmonized. We realize that everybody in the Francophone world must start off with the plan for Francophone immigration, which is being worked on, and from there we have to apply the strategy in the various jurisdictions, going from national to local, and that everybody has to harmonize their strategic plans based on their reality and their ecosystem in the community, in existing communities, in order so that for their version of strategic plan, but all of them should be aligned in terms of objectives and vision and terms. And then we can see where in the major plan are the specific local actions specific to the community. Every province has its own priorities, and it's a good idea to look at this federal Francophone immigration plan for harmonization so that we can see where there's less action here in Canada, less consideration for Francophone immigration. There's also a challenge at the provincial and municipal application because there are different frameworks in Ontario. There's a law on French services. It's not the case in all provinces. The RIF also presents a problem that needs to be settled. As we give an example of strategic plans, everybody takes the actions and characteristics typical of their reality, leave the other aside. But this allows us to bring up similar things, and we comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges, so they're leading to a national harmonization. That's it for the first question. Can I speak to the second? Just one idea. one idea on the second question. We were talking about collaboration between Francophones and Indigenous people. There are many issues. One we deal with this, and it's the same everywhere. And I think we have a very authentic approach and see who are the communities that we are dealing with, and if there's a mutual desire to collaborate, because we can't force anybody to collaborate with us. And we see in the Francophone world that many of the relations with First Nations are close, but often they're people that we interact with in English. And this causes a first level of difficulty. And then, of course, there's the weight of the history behind all of that. So it takes a delicate approach. Thank you very much. Chloe?
How are communities preparing for mass arrivals and humanitarian crisis new and future? We did discuss that there seems to be a wide spectrum of either no preparation at all and maybe planning would be dependent on future funding to some really promising ideas or practices. So we discussed about how could be local or even provincial LIP task forces that are put in place for when there is a time of humanitarian crisis or mass arrivals to maybe discuss emergent and short-term issues, or there was the discussion of maybe even having these forces provincially or locally set up beforehand before newcomers even arrive. We did discuss maybe the possibility of those that are already doing that kind of work taking the lead on creating a response plan, and then maybe that could be shared as a tool. So all about this idea of being proactive and planning before rather than being reactive after or during. We talked about how sometimes you could be as prepared as you'd want to be, but it could be difficult due to changing Canadian policies. For example, Quit visa, very different than the previous mass arrival. We talked about sustainability plans for regions already experiencing high migration movement, so even before unplanned mass arrivals. So for example, maybe areas where there's milder winters in Canada, so newcomers are gravitating there. So what do sustainability plans look like for that? Adjacent to that was why invite people if there's no place for them to stay. So for example, there might be areas where housing is limited, places where that's everywhere. And then we started to discuss, well, what is within the scope of the settlement sector, settlement and integration sector? For example, housing isn't really within that scope, but maybe LIPS can lift the mirror a bit more using data and advocacy to other stakeholders on other newcomer touch points to really highlight those issues. So for example, with housing, real estate boards, there was the mention of maybe even police, and to combat misinformation. We talked about a good deliberate look at who's at the LIP table and who's missing, so housing, non-settlement, and integration organizations, so to be better prepared if a crisis does happen. We had a little bit of a spicy discussion about are there people not valuable at the LIP table and are using it more of as a checkbox, or maybe are there capacity issues for LIP members? There was a suggestion about looking at APRC reports to inform who would be best at those tables, but it doesn't currently have an emergency preparedness mindset or element. There were varying results around LIP and ZIP terms of reference and contracts that are in place already, focusing and a desire to focus more on organization representation, not individuals, so that sustainability to make sure that the people at the table will be there despite staff turnover, movement, whatever. There was a mention of having RIFs or Francophone partners on advisory communities and working groups, but there's varying amounts of collaboration that is happening currently with RIFs. Example, some cities, municipalities actually are working with RIFs specifically on emergency preparedness, and then there seems to be differing layers of people working on the same things separately. And then the second question was about utilizing the Measuring Welcoming Communities Toolkit. We had some advocates at the table saying they feel everyone should use it. They also had the suggestion that P2P could actually have a database of a database on their site for indicators, and communities could compare the data. The toolkit definitely would benefit maybe from having a self-auditing tool, and then hence guidance on how to better meet the criteria. We talked about maybe it'd be great to do a scan of what's already being done, especially for those who are just getting started, so maybe LIPs and RIFs that haven't done this work but want to. And then finally, incorporating criteria into LIP, ZIP, RIF strategic plans maybe, and implementing KPIs. There we go.
Excellent. Wow. All that in like 35 minutes. I'm really impressed with.
And finally, we have Carl, who is reporting from the online session.
Thank you. And we had a really good participation from our online panelists or colleagues. And while there were widespread, while there were a range of interests and concerns, a few themes certainly came out as consistently of interest to participants. So one of them was the importance of linking the community planning processes that are underway with the actual realities and community needs on the ground. And in particular, the importance of the newcomer perspective, the host community perspective, and as well specific needs, for instance, faith communities or diversity and inclusion. So that came out quite strongly. Related to that was a sense that community leaders are aware of the scale and scope of the challenges, but often don't know where to start in addressing them. So perhaps some support needed there. Reach and retention were other themes that came out. So the reach in terms of reaching into rural and remote communities and retaining people, both in those and other communities. But there was optimism on that point because if people had a favorable experience, they often stayed in rural communities and became very strong contributors. In addition to dealing with the first question, our online participants also addressed the third one, and that was on strategic planning. So there, the challenge was getting specific enough with strategic planning. So often there were so many needs that identifying just 3 or 4 was something that a number of our participants highlighted. And but on the other hand, there was optimism and good progress. Il y a eu du progrès concernant les outils.
There was progress in terms of tools that will help us develop cultural skills and also develop sustainable development resources. There were some community initiatives that were very relevant for these challenges. There are some specific needs, and the strategic planning process, including diversity and inclusion, also at the economic level and employment level, and partnerships with Francophone organizations. Anglophones mentioned to what extent it was important for them to have people that would take part in their strategic planning process.
It was a healthy conversation, and the capacity issue did come out throughout, capacity and the importance of linking planning to specific needs and the realities on the ground that newcomers and communities experience.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to 4 of you. Merci beaucoup.